I'm Doug Keck, and welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. Author is Anthony DeStefano. Inside the Atheist Mind, published by Thomas Nelson Books. Also, we're going to be talking about a children's book at the very end, The Miracle of the Bread, the Fish, and the Boy. Great to see you.
Great to be back.
As always, people remember seeing you on with Father Mitch back in the spring. We were on the EWTN live show, of course. Now, you've been an author of many, many books having to do with heaven and a lot of children's books, but this is kind of a departure for Anthony DeStefano. Inside the Atheist Mind, Unmasking the Religion of Those Who Say There Is No God. When did you get so serious?
Well, actually, the other books have been out of character. This is more in line with my aggressive New York personality.
Okay.
I finally got to write a book that was more me.
That's why I recognized your voice in here.
Yeah, the other books, the Heaven book.
You've been toning it down over the years.
Yes.
Okay. So what was it that made you decide that a book like this needed to be written? Because what's interesting about your book is you spend the whole beginning of it telling everybody what it's not.
Oh, yes. That I told them that it's not a book written for atheists, it's a book about atheists. Right. I wanted to sound a note, an aggressive, in-your-face note against these new atheists from the very beginning of the book. And the reason is because I've been frustrated by these atheists. I've seen their books and their blogs and their nasty billboard campaigns that they have around the holidays, these in-your-face attacks on Christianity. And I've realized that atheism is really an epidemic right now. Not only has the number of professed atheists grown, but the number of religiously unaffiliated people who believe in nothing, has reached 25% of the population in this country.
The nuns, right?
Yes, and they're the second largest religious group in Europe. But what's really troubling are these functional atheists. Functional atheists are people who say that they're Christians, they say that they're Jewish, they say that they're Muslims, but they're really not. They don't hold to the tenets of those religions. Maybe they go to church once in a while, but for all intents and purposes, they are secular humanists.
Right.
And these secular humanists, they don't let their belief in God or their professed belief in their religion affect their behavior.
Well, you describe it as a religion. They would say, of course, it's not a religion.
Oh, yes, and that is one of the main topics of this book. Right. Atheism is very much a faith. Look, faith is just believing in things that you can't mathematically absolutely prove. And atheists believe a tremendous number of things on faith. They believe that everything came from nothing. They believe that, or they believe that the universe itself is eternal. They can't prove that scientifically. They believe that this beautiful, incredible universe of incomparable harmony and order came about all by itself. They believe that life came from lifelessness, that order came from chaos, that mind and thought came from mindlessness and thoughtlessness. I mean, none of that is science. None of that can be scientifically proved. Those are much more stupendous miracles than any of the Gospels report. And what they
right in the
believe
beginning, you talk about, you mentioned Christopher Hitchens, who's dead now, Richard Dawkins, and also Sam Harris is a crop of arrogant unbelievers who are in such vogue today. Why are they in such vogue today?
I think it has to do with their confidence and their brashness, their firebrand, and they are very attractive to youth. People want certitude. They're attracted to certitude, and a lot of times that's what's missing on our side.
I see.
But they come off as being extremely sure of themselves, and and I think, quite frankly, the hedonistic lifestyle that they advocate,
they espouse, and
is attractive to you.
Right. Sounds good, right?
Yes.
Unfortunately, like with drugs, the negative effects don't always show up right away. It takes a while for the negative effects to actually hit you.
That's right.
And many times, then it can be too late in many people's lives.
That's right. Well, we're seeing plenty of the effects of atheism, and as we'll discuss about the connection between death and all the the
that's
death-centered.
One of the death-centered chapters you have in the book. You said the focus on this book is obnoxious, aggressive new atheists who not only reject God but also wish to evangelize the world with their gospel of nothingness. And you alluded to that before. It seems to be part of the differences. It used to be atheists and agnostics kind of sat in the corner and talked to each other. Now they're evangelizing the society. Yeah. Why do you think that's changed?
They're just getting bold because their position has solidified. They've gotten into positions of power. They really control the levers of power in this country right now. And by that I mean they control the communications. These functional atheists, these secular humanists, dominate the entertainment industry, the music industry, the academic world, and about 85% of the media. So they control the levers of power. So now they're just much more bold.
Even though when even Pew studies, as we see religious practice and spirituality dropping and belief in God dropping slightly, the vast majority of people in the United States are still God-fearing people, basically. So it's interesting that the media doesn't reflect it, but is trying to lead it in another direction.
It is, and that's the evangelical aspect of this. They are a religion, they are a faith, they're trying to spread this gospel of nothingness, and they're doing it very effectively.
You refer to them as, modern-day atheists, as bullies. I'm afraid there's only one way to deal with bullies, even in this politically correct world, and that is to crush them.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting in a sense because we're all worked up about bullying online and things like that, but yet when it comes to this kind of bullying, nobody says anything.
I think that has to do with one of the problems of being Christian. Sometimes Christians misinterpret Christ's demand to turn the other cheek. You know, they think that that means that we have to not fight against injustice, and that's not what Christ meant. When he said that, he meant that you know, when someone offends us, insofar as it's possible, we shouldn't let it be a personal offense. We shouldn't take it as a personal grievance. We shouldn't let it offend our pride. We should turn the other cheek insofar as it's possible, but we should never turn another person's cheek. We don't have the right to stand by while someone else is a victim of injustice. Christ himself didn't turn the other cheek when he was, I mean, he was killed because he confronted the hypocrites of his time. He made a whip of cords and drove the money changers out of the temple. He called the scribes you know, a brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones and hypocrites. He was tough. He fought back, and that's what Christians need to do today. We need to be more Christ-like and confront this culture of bullies.
In the chapter Arrogance of the Atheists, you say, my main purpose here will be to expose once for all the blatant hypocrisy, dishonesty, and intellectual bankruptcy of the atheists themselves. When you really look at what the new atheists are saying, you won't find a carefully constructed logical argument against the theistic position. In fact, you don't find any argument at all. Above all, what you find is arrogance.
Yes, arrogance. Well, all you have to do is look at the titles of their books, and you know, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, We're Deluded, or God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And some of the quotes by these atheists saying that all religions are equally dumb and equally dangerous. It's arrogant. Just what they believe is arrogant. The atheists believe that the vast majority of human beings over the long span of history, from all time periods and all places, have been wrong about the thing that's most important to them. And they don't just think that we're wrong, they think that it's absurd to believe in God, that you have to be an imbecile to believe in God, that you have to believe in God, that you believe in God because either you're afraid of death or because you're stupid. That's arrogant.
We're either imbeciles or cowards.
Yes. And when you look, and it's patently absurd, because when you look at history, you see that the bravest and most intelligent geniuses were believers.
And you list some of them in the book. In fact, you say, indeed, the whole modern age of science was pioneered by believers, which is kind of interesting because they defer to science all the time.
Yes, that's right. They're completely ignorant of history. You know, Aristotle, Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, the people who invented the scientific method itself, the father of bacteriology, the father of chemistry, all these people were deep believers. In fact, the person who came up with the Big Bang Theory, Doug, was a Roman Catholic priest named Father George Lemaitre, who was a Belgian astronomer. The person who was the founder of genetics, which is the basis of the whole theory of evolution, was Gregor Mendel, who was an Augustinian monk. I mean, so you have a monk who's the founder, the father of genetics, and a priest who formulated the Big Bang Theory. How can you say that religion and Christianity is opposed to science?
It's interesting
ludicrous.
too, because you say here, talk about Einstein, and you talk about when Einstein heard that particular priest give a talk at Catholic University in 1933. Einstein heard that talk. He said, "This is the most beautiful and satisfactory explanation of creation to which I have ever listened."
Yes. Yes, and Einstein was not an atheist. Now, Einstein wasn't a Christian, and he didn't believe in a personal God like we do, but he absolutely, categorically denied being an atheist. He hated when people called him an atheist. He said, how can anyone be an atheist when you look at the beauty and the harmony of the universe?
And you quote Joel Primack, an American astrophysicist, who said, in the last few years, astronomy has come together so that we're now able to tell a coherent story of how the universe began. This story does not contradict God, but instead enlarges the idea of God.
Yes, yes. The deeper you go into science, the more it becomes obvious that the beginnings are so mysterious that it's very rational to think that there was a creator and a designer.
Right. So is your goal? So you believe in spanking? Because apparently you think that we need to intellectually spank.
Well, I believe in spanking atheists. That's for sure.
Okay.
They need. We have to respond in an aggressive way to these folks. They are doing a lot of damage to society, and they're attacking us, and you have to fight back. We can't. To be a Christian doesn't mean to be a punching bag or a carpet to walk on.
Okay, in chapter 2, the ignorance of the atheists. This is interesting because, as someone said, I think on Father Mitch's show, that most atheist people run into present themselves as intellectuals, and this is kind of this elitist look, and that we're superstitious, etc., and that's why we believe these things. And you say at the same time, a little learning is a dangerous thing. That was Alexander Pope's observation. How does that relate to atheists?
Well, these atheists, again, when it comes to science, they know a little bit of science, and then they think that somehow religion is opposed to science. They fall into this. Bishop Robert Barron talks about this a lot. They all seem to fall into this fallacy known as scientism. Scientism is the belief that all knowledge must be scientific in nature. If it's not scientific, then I don't believe it. Okay? But think about that for a second. How in the world do you prove that statement scientifically? It's impossible. You can't demonstrate that empirically or experimentally. That in itself is an article of faith. So this is an example of atheists, thinking in a very shallow way. They say things like science is the basis of everything, and then they don't even think about that statement, which in itself is an article of faith.
Well, one of the things you point out here that I've always thought in the back of my mind, this idea of people putting up science, and I say, well, the science of which particular year, 1500, 1700? Because science has believed many things over the years that it no longer believes today. The early 20th century, for instance, little was known about the chemical element radium. The dangers of radioactivity had not been discovered, so a few ignorant doctors began using radioactive materials as a therapy for various illnesses. And again, a little bit of information. Later on we find out, oh, this doesn't work the way we thought it was going to work. It's not. Right. Our explanation actually is no longer holds water.
They're ignorant in so many ways. Just in the words of Christopher Hitchens, religion poisons everything. Now, does it really poison everything? They think that religion is the enemy of freedom, that it's the enemy of art, that it's the enemy of rational thinking, that it's the enemy of peace. Right. I mean, and then they go through history looking for the rotten fruit. They look for bad examples of things, and then they say that the religion is the enemy. And meanwhile, if you look at history, the exact opposite is the truth.
Right.
Religion has been in terms of rational thinking. We produced all these geniuses. We invented the library system, the university system. We preserved all the knowledge from antiquity. In terms of the humanitarian,
well, as you point out here,
charities.
In those 5 points you were starting to allude to there, the fifth one, they think religion seeks power, encourages bloodshed, is therefore responsible for countless deaths. And I know this is something Father Mitch has talked about in the past many times, and it rolls into your chapter 3 on ruthlessness and talking about the whole idea of the big lie. But this big lie that somehow religion is responsible for more people's death in history, and you take that apart in the book.
The greatest causes of war there are four main causes of war. Territorial gain, economic gain, civil war, and revolutionary war. Those are the four greatest causes for war in our history, not religion. Philip Axelrod's Encyclopedia of Wars, which categorizes all the wars going back to 8000 BC, found that only 6.98% of all wars were religious in nature. And of those, if you eliminate Islam from the equation, only 3.2% of all the wars had specifically Christian causes. So that means over 96% of all the wars that have taken place in history had other kinds of reasons, worldly reasons. So how can atheists complain hysterically about Christianity being so? The reason why they complain hysterically is because the best defense is a good offense. The truth is, when you look at bloodshed and wars over the last several centuries, it's atheists who are responsible for the most bloodshed.
Well, it's interesting, too, because as you define religion, in some ways you could say it was religion because these atheists have their own kind of religious code. I mean, Nazism was its own religion. Communism under Mao was or Stalin were, in a sense, state religion.
It's a worship of themselves. Right. That's the thing. But you see, because they don't believe in God, they don't believe in any transcendent law against killing. Because they don't believe in God, they don't believe that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, we are nothing special. We're just like other animals. We don't have infinite dignity. You put those two beliefs together, no transcendent belief against killing, and human beings don't have infinite dignity. That's a deadly recipe for murdering anyone who gets in your way. And indeed, that's what happened in the 20th century with the totalitarian regimes. Mao Zedong, Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, Stalin. They killed 150 million human beings.
At least.
Right, and they were killed by avowed atheists. They weren't killed by Christians. They weren't killed by atheists. Killed these people.
And you take down the whole myth about Hitler and his Catholicism and his Christianity in the book as well.
Well, some atheists ludicrously claim that Hitler was Christian because he was born a Christian and because he pandered to the church before he took power. But it is very obvious from reading Hitler's personal diaries and the Nuremberg trials that he hated Christianity. He thought it was a scourge. He thought it was the invention of the Jews, and that as soon as he was able to take power, he wanted to be able to rid the world of the Christians. So he did not believe in God at all. He was an atheist.
It was kind of the type who would accuse Christianity of being the fall of the Roman Empire because it brought this kind of corruption and niceness kind of thing that was not powerful and strong. You also take on the idea, hey, what about the Crusades? What about the Inquisition?
Well, I say that the atheists are complaining, they're still whining and complaining about the Crusades and the Inquisition. These are, historic events that took place centuries ago under murky historical we don't really know so much about them. We know several 100,000 people died. We don't know the exact number. It was terrible, sure, that some people died and that the church was probably the cause of that, sure. But you can't compare several 100,000 people dying over the course of 100 years, hundreds of years ago, to 150 million people killed just in the last 90 years.
And also the idea the Crusades, in theory, were an attempt to recapture the Holy Lands that had been taken over
by the Muslims.
So if you look at that as a war, like World War II was a war, another war. There were a lot of people who died in those wars. When you're talking about the secularists, you're not talking about wars. You're talking about a war on their own people.
On their people, and people who believed in God, and anyone who disagreed with them.
Right. Same thing. I thought this was interesting. Spanish Inquisition. The actual number of people sentenced to death was about 3,000. Of those, none were executed by the church, only by the state.
Only by the state.
Exactly, because the church didn't have the power. And moreover, the deaths took place over the course of 350 years. The other thing is, most people at that time would have been much happier to be judged by the church than by the state.
Yes, yes.
And
you have to remember that a lot of these figures are inflated by people in the academic world today who have a vested interest in attacking the church. Remember, the academia, like the media, like the entertainment industry, is to a large extent controlled by secular humanists on the left, and they do not hesitate to lie and distort the truth.
Right, and you talk about Goebbels, etc. in the book, and the big lie. You say, atheists may think that certain crimes are reprehensible. I thought this was interesting, but ultimately their reasons are either emotional, practical in nature, not existential, because people will say, well, you can be a good person.
Yes.
I don't have to believe in God. I can still know what's right and what's wrong.
Yes, and this is an example of the cowardice of these new atheists as well. They don't have the courage to face up to the logical implications of their own thinking. If you don't believe in God, then it is impossible for you to have a moral imperative against killing. Yes, you can be against killing. There's a million reasons to be against killing, practical reasons to be against killing. But ultimately, it comes down to your personal belief, your personal code of conduct, like what flavor ice cream you like. It's not because there's a God outside of the universe who's commanding you not to kill and who might send you to hell if you take part in that kind of a sin.
Well, it's interesting, too, as you move into the intolerance of the atheists, you say that they're very tolerant as long as you agree with them, and I think we see that a lot in society. Also, the important thing as they attack the church is to realize that so much of the problems we have today come out of men like Comte, Feuerbach, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche. These are the philosophers, you say, these atheist philosophers of the 19th century who laid the ideological foundation for the atheist political leaders of the 20th century, who are the ones who committed those crimes.
That's right, right. Yeah, you could trace this back to those thinkers of the 19th and the 18th century. But their thinking has become the practice of the 20th and the 21st century. It's trickled down to now it's become the practice.
Chapter 5, The Shallowness of the Atheist, and you say, which character deserves the longest discussion? And you pick this one. Why?
Because they are totally intellectually bankrupt. We've touched on this already a little bit. I had a friend named Vince Bugliosi who was the prosecutor in the Charles Manson.
You quote him in the book.
Yes, he was an agnostic, but he took apart the New Atheist. He went over every single book and argument the New Atheist wrote, and he came to the conclusion that atheism is nothing but a sorry litany of non sequiturs.
Right.
Now, a non sequitur is just a logical fallacy where the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises. And basically, he said that is exactly what all the New Atheists' argument are. The New Atheists will say that the Bible is full of errors and therefore God doesn't exist. Or religion is full of bad people, so God doesn't exist. Or there are plenty of hypocritical Christians, so God doesn't exist. Or look at all the unanswered prayer, so God doesn't exist. But none of those things are even true, and certainly they don't prove that there's no God. Right. So that's a very shallow kind of thinking, and then they fall into this scientism that we talked about earlier. Right,
and you also deal with several other topics, cowardness, death-centeredness, which we see certainly in the culture of death today,
yes.
Faithfulness in their own atheism, malevolence, and the end of the atheist. People have to find out how that works out. They have to get the book to find that out. Because we also wanted to talk in our closing minutes about something a little more upbeat and positive. The miracle of the bread, the fish, and the boy. This is another one of your children's books. How many children's books have you put together now?
8.
Okay.
8.
Okay, and what's this one about? Has something to do with the loaves and the fishes?
The multiplication of the loaves and fishes in the Gospel of John. John relates that Jesus wanted to feed all the people, and he made them sit on the ground, and the disciple Andrew found a boy who had a few loaves and fishes.
Right.
And then the next scene is Jesus performing the miracle. But what's implied there is that Jesus asked, or the disciples asked the boy for his loaves and fishes. Right. It belonged to the boy. Right. So this book is about that boy and about his act of generosity, about how it led to this miracle.
Which is also interesting because in some ways there's two miracles that happen in the book, in the sense that the boy's generosity not only is rewarded initially, but then later when he doesn't think
it's going to be. Yes, and without giving it away, the meaning though is that when we give everything to God, all of ourselves, He multiplies all the good that we do. He takes it and He expands it and multiplies it, just like He multiplied the bread and the fish. And also the book has a strong Eucharistic message too, because just as He multiplied the bread in this book, He multiplies the bread on Sundays when we receive His body at Mass.
Now, is this the same illustrator you've been using over the years?
For the donkey that no one could ride and the sheep. Yes, he's so good at, he's such a brilliant New York Times award-winning illustrator that I used him.
So where does an idea come for like a children's book like this?
Usually, to tell you the truth, I'm at Mass or something like that. I don't enjoy. The thing is, Doug, I'm one of those people who don't enjoy Mass very much. A lot of times I'm distracted, I have to admit. And during those moments when I'm distracted, sometimes my mind will wander and I'll come up with a good idea. That's not an argument for distractions at Mass, but it's the truth.
Okay. Let me ask you, so do you have any more children's books in the work?
I do. Actually, a Catholic children's book with Sophia Institute Press.
Oh, great. Okay.
Charlie McKinney and I have worked up a book about Our Lady called Our Lady's Wardrobe. It's all about all the outfits that she wore during her apparitions, and it's about all her apparitions. And it's a way to introduce children to Our Lady and her role in our religion and leading people to Christ.
Okay. We'll look for that. Also, anything else on another level similar to this atheist book?
For HarperCollins, I've contracted to write a book called A Travel Guide to Hell.
Okay.
Just like I wrote A Travel Guide to Heaven, now they want me to write A Travel Guide to Hell. So I need some prayers on writing that one, because that's a very serious book.
And how does one go about thinking about something like that?
I haven't even started yet, but I know it's going to be hard to do.
How much time do they give you to write something like that?
Usually a year, but I could always get an extension if I really need. But that book is I want to show that hell exists and that it's a reality. But at the same time, I want it to somehow be an inspirational book. I don't want it to be just, you know, threatening people, hitting people over the head with something. If you don't do this, I want to show the reality of hell and make it persuasive and believable.
Right, and one of the things we have to all acknowledge in the world is that our actions have repercussions.
That's right.
And I think that's a part that seems to get lost sometimes in today's society.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you for
Always
having
a pleasure
me.
to have you
Doug.
here.
Thank you.
Anthony DeStefano, Inside the Atheist Mind, Unmasking the Religion of Those Who Say There Is No God. Very accessible reading. Check it out. And of course, for the kids and the family, The Miracle of the Bread and the Fish and the Boy. All available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Of course, EWTNRC.com. Thanks for joining us, and we shall see you next time on Bookmark. Thanks.